Hey everybody, Boomhauer69 here, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about why I'm fascinated with cars from the 1800s and simply the 1900s. Well, the reason why I like those cars from the olden days, the early days of automobiles, is because I'm always thinking about, well, since they didn't have this tool or that machine or this technology or that technology, I'm always thinking about, how did they do that? And so that's what I like about it is thinking about how them old boys back in the day, the old farm boys messing around out in their barn, like, how in the heck did they make that, and how did they do that? And that's what inspired me to maybe to someday in the near future to save up enough money to build my own design from scratch of an automobile and stuff. That's why I kind of that boat trailer frame I've been thinking about turn that into some sort of kind of vintage looking car. But yeah, I'm always looking at cars from the olden days, like from the 1900s and 1800s, the early days of automobiles, and I'm always thinking about how did they go about doing that and stuff. How did they, you know, take the hammer and bend that piece of metal to a certain shape and stuff and different things, and it just amazes me what they could do with just what primitive technology they had back in those days and stuff. And so yeah, that's why I like the cars of the 1800s and the 1900s, is simply trying to figure out how did they do that, how did they make this possible, how did they make a differential, how did they, make a gearbox, as they used to call it, and how did they make electric starters in them days and all that stuff. And I'm always, because back in those days, the old country boys, they didn't have nothing to go by. Like nowadays, I can go back and look at an encyclopedia book, the internet, Google, whatever, and learn about how they did things. Back then, the old boys, they had to figure that stuff out on their own. There wasn't no manual of how to do this or how to do that, how to make a gearbox, how to make a transmission, how to make a starter, and they didn't have none of that. They had to figure that all on their own. So, well, yeah. Now, personally, me, I'm a fan of the old-timey hand cranks and stuff. And what I thought about be neat to do is take a lawnmower engine and build a rolling chassis that looks like something that came from the 1900s. My own design, my own creation, not, go to the salvage yard and find some old 1900s Model T and then slap a lawnmower engine in it. No, build my own little design of a car and put a lawnmower engine in it where people would say, man, that's really cool. What brand was that, and what that looks like it came from 1914, and be like, nope. And if they said, that looks like it came from 1905, nope. And they say, like, well, then what year did it come out? Come out and say 2024 or 2025, or whatever, well, 2026, more like it. Yeah, I don't know why I said 2024. We're in 2025, going to be going into 2026. But be like, oh, it was built in the year 2026, and people saying, wow, and stuff, Obviously, that's going to take a group of engineers and people to do, but yeah, that's what gets me is thinking about how them old timers had to do things and stuff, and make it and try to make it work and stuff, Because what a lot of old time cars were, especially in the late 1800s, is they took stationary motors, steam powered. They would take their, a lot of farms had motors, lying around, and they had horse and buggies, obviously. And so what the old boys did was they took that stationary coal burning steam engine or or when gasoline came about, they would take their gasoline engines and they would figure out how to mount it on a horse buggy, and once they figured out how to make it move and steer and stuff and go, that was the family automobile and stuff. A lot of, and even when cars first came out and were for sale out on the market, 9 times out of 10, the average farmer, average Joe Blow, couldn't afford it because it was a rich people's toy at the time, until Henry Ford came along and said, hey, I got a way to make the Model T, which Henry Ford was not the inventor of the automobile. I say that was Carl Benz, which some people would say that's even debatable, but I say Carl Benz, the one that created Mercedes-Benz, he was the one who created the very first automobile. What he did was, there were multiple patents out there at the time in the 1800s, late 1800s. I forget what year it was when he made it. I didn't even bother Googling anything. But in the late 1800s, Carl Benz, there was many people out there, patenting horseless carriages is what they used to call them. Horseless carriages, which stands for something that moves without needing horses, because horse and buggy was a thing at the time. But anyways, there was tons of patents out there for this horseless carriage. Carl Benz and his wife, because she played a huge role in it, their patent for the motor wagon, as they called it, the Benz motor wagon, was the most practical one. The patent world, whatever, looked at all the different kind of car designs, and they said, well, okay, Carl Benz is the actual practical one, because other people tried, but their inventions were too complicated, or they broke down it, or they just didn't seem practical enough, where Carl Benz motor wagon was the most practical. And then through there, that's when automobiles started becoming a thing. And then later on, Henry Ford, who created the Ford Motor Company, which Henry Ford had other car companies that failed until he successfully made the Ford Motor Company. He figured out, I don't think he was actually the inventor of the assembly line, but he improved on the concept of the assembly line of manufacturing. He's the one that got the whole idea of, hey, instead of having guys run around to these different departments or have a team of guys working on one vehicle at a time, why don't have each person focusing on one thing and just have basically the parts come down. He created an assembly line conveyor belt set up where the vehicle itself would move to one station, that station would put on a part, move to the next station, put on a part, and so forth, so on, until it was fully completed, until they had a full completed automobile. Then once he got all the bugs worked out of it and stuff, and figured out how to get people to work faster, then he brought down the price of the automobile, because he was mass producing a product which brought down the cost, and then made something that the average farmer and man, woman could use. The average person could afford. The average poor old country hillbilly could finally say, hey, I can kind of somewhat, well, still gotta wait till it pops on the used market. Then when it came on the used market, that old country farm boy was shucking out them dollar bills, and eventually got him a Model T, because that was Henry Ford's idea, was to take the automobile and make it where the common man could afford to own one, because before him, they were rich people toy and stuff. And so just thinking about how they had to do things, and how they had to weld things, and how they had to invent tools and different things, because that's why we have so many modern day tools, is because in the auto industry, they were always trying to figure out how can we make this easier to build, or how can we make a tool that could work, that could actually make this tool and make this part and this and that and that. So a lot of inventions came along, because some guy working at those places, thought, well, how can I make make a tool that will make this part a lot faster and better and things and so forth, so on. So that's why I like more of the early days of automobiles, because they knew how to also take something so primitive but make it elegant and beautiful, where they really took just the simplest basic thing, because basically your go-karts that your kids drive around, those were basically like the early days of automobiles, but yet they knew how to take such a simple, basic, primitive thing and make it elegant and make it beautiful, where people would look at it and say, wow, I want that, So that's why I like more the early days of automobiles, because it really gets you more thinking than versus someone driving a 66 Mustang and with loud pipes, revving on his motor, thinking that's how he's going to get the chicks, Yeah, sure. And even you Camaro guys with your classic Camaros are thinking, oh, that's how you're going to get the ladies. Yeah. To me, instead of driving some muscle car from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I'd rather be driving something from the 1900s and stuff, because I look at it when the what they call the shift happens or the grid goes down, that Model T, I guarantee you, that Model T will still be able to run. And since they didn't have a whole lot of fancy tools back in the day, it's going to be a lot easier to work on a Model T than versus some of these newer cars where you got to have all these special doodads and gadgets and stuff. And especially cars that have computers and stuff that require a computer diagnostics or some fancy little tool, because nowadays automakers want to make it where mechanic shops got to have special tools to work on their cars and stuff. And that's what makes the older cars from the 1900s so beautiful, is because you don't need all these fancy tools. You can practically, how they built back in the olden days was screwdrivers and a hammer. That's how they built a Model T back in the day, practically, and a set of wrenches. You could be back on the road, Yeah, it might take you a couple of days to get to point A to point B, when it used to only take you a couple hours, but because obviously old cars don't go that fast from the 1900s, and why would you want to do 100 miles per hour in a Model T is beyond me, because the way they built those things, that's a accident waiting to happen. So, but yeah, that's the thing is that they were able to take something primitive and turn it into something beautiful. That's what always gets me about the cars of the 1800s and 1900s, like the curb dash Oldsmobile. Some of them, the curb dash Oldsmobile, some of them were just made out of wood, where they just put a motor on a horseless carriage. Is all the curb dash Oldsmobile was. Is they just took a two-seater horse carriage, slapped a motor on it, and called it a day and stuff. Ransom. Right, Ransom, Elliot Owens, Owens was the one, Oldsmobile. I always pronounce his first name wrong, but Ransom Elliot Owens, who created the curb dash Oldsmobile, that what really fascinates me is how he took something basic and could make it beautiful, You really, in those days, you didn't have fancy computers painting the little lines and stuff on the body. It was actually a guy who had a little paintbrush and a steady hand, and you're sitting there thinking, wow, the hours it took to have some guy take just a little teeny little paintbrush like you used in the art class when you were in elementary school using your Crayola paint kit. You have that guy with that thin little brush, carefully, slowly painting the lines. And when I painting them decorative little lines, they call them pinstripes and stuff on the car. I see that and I say, yep, that's why we have robots and fancy computers that now can do that, because eventually some guy came along doing that with his arm hurting, saying, there's gotta be a simpler way to do this and stuff. So that's what I like about it, because the old cars is thinking about all the technology that came afterwards because of this piece of machinery and stuff is what gets me all like, ooh, this is cool and neat, and because think about it once in a while, if it wasn't for those automobiles and them old boys, we wouldn't have the tools and the cars and the stuff we have nowadays. A lot of it came from those guys trying to figure out how can we make this simpler and speed up the process, because a lot of them were like, they're bosses, they're money guys, and like, hey, they're always, hey, I want to hear your ideas. How can we speed up this process, Because trust me, them old boys painting and stuff and taking their jolly old time, I guarantee you, a few of them had an old boss man, Mr. Big Bulldog coming down there yelling at them to say, work faster, faster, faster. And finally some old boy scratching his head saying, oh, I'm sick and tired of this boss man breathing down my neck. How do I do this quicker and easier? And then he developed a solution and stuff, So, and that's what happened with Henry Ford. He was getting sick and tired of probably yelling at his employees to work faster, faster, faster. And he just thought to himself, man, there's got to be a simple way. And he figured out how to improve the idea of the assembly line and make it work. And then bing, bada, boom, that's how come we have nowadays factories that bring parts to you and you add your part on it and stuff, And the conveyor belt system came about because of the industry, what Henry Ford did and stuff there. He got his team of experts and they said, we got a solution and stuff. But yeah, that's why I like the old cars of the 1800s and the 1900s, is just thinking about how they did things and how new technology came about because of this or that and stuff, and so that's the biggest thing for me, is just the fascination of how they did it and how the old boys and even the women in those times, because women a lot of times worked in the sewing department, sewing the fabrics onto the car seats and stuff. A lot of women worked in those factories, working them sewing machines, and we're trying to figure out how to do it even better, and that's how come we have nowadays automatic machines that can sew stuff. It's because some woman went and said, that does, how do I make this better so my boss ain't breathing down my neck? And they figured a way to make an automatic machine that can automatically stitch and sew up, the furniture and stuff, or man or whatever, Well, yeah, that's why I like the older cars better than the newer cars, just because I'm always, to me, it gets you thinking more than versus, to me anyways, versus a muscle car from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And to me, there's so many people out there that are fascinated with the muscle cars from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and it's like, to me, it's like, yeah, I'd rather see chitty, I call it chitty, bang, bang, and see a Model T and a curb dash Oldsmobile or the old Stanley steamer trucks and stuff like that, because to me those are way more cooler, because it's like, because to me it just gets you more thinking and stuff, and so yeah, and my future goal is to someday be able to have the money to be able to get with a team of experts and recreate my own version of a car that looks like it came out of the 1900s and when it was actually built in modern day times. I'm not gonna go and buy some Model T car off the internet and modify it and stuff. No, I'm gonna get me a team of experts, a team of mechanical engineers, and say, hey, let's make this a reality and design it, build it and stuff. I guess maybe make like a little doomsday automobile or something. I don't know, but yeah, that would be my neat idea and stuff. And since obviously nobody knows how to hand crank a car anymore these days. That's why I would just do the old famous recoil pull cord. I would do something where you just turn your kill switch on, slide your key in the kill switch slot, turn it in the on position, prime like you do your push lawnmower, prime the carburetor a few times, and then pull the recoil pull cord on it and fire up and off you go. Oh, it wouldn't be my design wouldn't be a speed demon, but in the end times when you can't drive your modern day car because it's too broke down or what the hey, I'd look at people and say, hey, it beats the heck out of walking, where people would point and laugh at me, but they'd be the one walking along with their hobo sack on a stick and a string, and I'd be saying to them, hey, it beats the heck out of walking, and then they'd start thinking about, yep, and maybe build a prototype or something that could potentially be made and maybe sell it as like a little recreational vehicle toy, because obviously cars from the 1800s and 1900s, ones that are fully restored and you can actually run around and drive in, they ain't cheap. The only cheap ones out there are the Model Ts, but obviously an actual real curved dash Oldsmobile, or the more rarer ones like the old Buicks and Cadillacs and stuff like that, they're gonna be fetching $50,000-$60,000. Even the old Stanley steamers, you ain't, and stuff. So I would try to, if I could in the future build an automobile company, I would build something that specifies in building cars that look like something that came out of the 1800s and 1900s, so that way to give people an opportunity to kind of own a retro classic car with obviously a few modern day features like headlights, turn signals, obviously seat belts and a horn, and a few little modern amenities. Obviously, there ain't gonna be really no radio or anything, just that the stuff you would legally have to have. Obviously, local government, the government would probably fight me because I'd say no to airbags and stuff, but just have your basic seat belts and your headlights and turn signal lights and stuff. That the things you gotta have and stuff. But yeah, that's why I like the cars of the 1800s and 1900s, because it really gets you thinking, how did they do that and stuff, and to me and to me the old cars of the 1800s, 1900s, they just seem to be, to me, way more cooler looking than versus something from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Usually, I always tell people a lot of times when they ask me, what kind of cars do you like? I usually say from about roughly the 1930s on back, after that, I'm kind of like, they all seem to not, spark my attention and stuff, but yeah, if you ever wonder what kind of classic cars Boomhauer 69's into, he's just into the early days of automobiles, back when they made steam power cars and back when internal combustion engines first popped on scene and stuff. So I always say basically from the 1900s on back, or sometimes I'll even say from the 1930s on back. I'll sometimes include the 1920s cars, because that's when the Model T came out, was in the 1920s. But yeah, there's the types of classic cars I'm into. I'm not into the muscle cars of the 60s, 70s, and 50s and stuff. I'm into the super old ones. The cars that they were making back during when World War One first broke out and stuff. So yeah. But there you have it. If you like this sort of content, give this video a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you didn't like it, comment your thoughts below. What kind of vehicles are you into and stuff? Do you like muscle cars or cars from the 1900s or the cars from the 80s, 90s, whatever, you know? Drop down below what you think, what kind of car you like. Even if do you like a Corvette or whatever, you know? Put down your dream cars or whatever. Actually, my dream car is a Trumbo cycle car, a real old car that didn't last very long because I like them little cycle cars they made back in the day. Because, well, big guy here in a little car. Yeah, those are the kind of cars I like the most stuff. So my two favorites, I would say, well, make it three. The Ford Model T, Kurt Dad's Oldsmobile, and Trumbo cycle car. But, you know, again, down in the comment section, put what kind of cars you like, you know, old, new, modern, whatever. And don't forget to share this video with everyone you know, and hit that subscribe button, because that's going to help the YouTube algorithm. And by you sharing this video with everyone you know, that's going to help me gain more views and more subscribers that way. Hope you all have a good day, and thank you for watching Boomhauer 69's YouTube channel.